Okay, so because this is going to be live streamed, I'm going to get started so that people who are you know, waiting online won't be wondering what's going on. So thank you so much for coming here. It's just wonderful to be in person, but also have live streaming. So I'm Yael Aronoff, the director of the Sterling Institute for Jewish Studies in Modern Israel, and I just want to let you know of our two upcoming events. So on November 2nd, also a Tuesday from 7 to 8:30, we have Professor Bruce Hayes, who's going to be delivering the inaugural Leonard Gilman Lecture on Jewish Culture about Black folks and the Jewish experience. And then our next lecture is going to be by Professor Ilan Shroon about the struggle over Israel's legitimacy, a status report and analysis. And he's also going to be talking about the way about the Abraham Accords on one hand, but other real challenges Israel's legitimacy on the other, and how the Accords working simultaneously in kind of different directions. And he will be speaking also in person, and will be live streamed in case in Jackson College, November 16th at 7 p.m. to 8:30. So just a reminder to keep those evenings open if you can. We're really thrilled to sponsor this lecture on the 1-year anniversary of the Abraham Accords. So it's perfect timing just this week. We have Israeli Foreign Minister and also the Prime Minister Yair Lapid and the UAE Foreign Minister Sheikh Abdullah bin Zayed and Secretary of State Anthony Blinken will be meeting in DC this week to talk about how the Abraham Accords can be strengthened and broadened, and maybe can be used to influence things in a better direction on the Israeli-Palestinian track eventually as well. So we're really perfect timing in terms of this talk. Justice Richard Bernstein became the first elected blind justice to the Michigan Supreme Court in November 2014. And prior to being elected to Michigan's highest court, Justice Bernstein was known as a tireless advocate for disabled rights, heading the public service division for the St. Louis law firm. Justice Bernstein is a graduate of the University of Michigan and earned his JD from Northwestern University School of Law. And in his spare time, Justice Bernstein was an avid runner, completing 24 marathons, including 14 New York City marathons, a full Ironman triathlon, and a half Ironman, so pretty incredible. This evening, he's going to be talking to us about the human face of the Abraham Accords. Disability is a common struggle. So he will discuss his experiences working for 3 months in the United Arab Emirates and 3 months in Israel in 2021, pretty recently, to forge relationships and develop a common understanding of struggles faced by the disabled and the strength and resilience that emerges from those struggles. Justice Bernstein was invited by the UAE in the wake of the Abraham Accords between Israel, the UAE, Morocco, and Bahrain to help draft policy for disability. Bernstein will describe how leaders and community members of each country work to promote cooperation in areas of education, job placement programs, and athletic opportunities, bringing Israeli assistive technologies and logistical capabilities in these areas to bear. Israeli organizations like the Shariva National Center and Access Israel, with Bernstein's guidance, working with organizations like the Ministry of the Community Development of the UAE to develop new initiatives and projects, as well as develop relationships of mutual understanding and shared experiences. He has been doing this kind of advocacy work with the United Nations for years, so it's really a real true honor. I think every single person I've ever spoken to has really talked about my diversity as kind of incredibly unique in the way that he inspires and the warmth that he exudes, his enthusiasm and the positive outlook that he brings to actually even kind of the most complex conflicts to bring some hope and kind of ways of constructively working together. So it's really a great pleasure to have you here with us and to have our first kind of in-person event that's also a live stream since the pandemic. So we're really honored to have you. Thank you so much.
Call came in. There are some people in the region that would like to meet you. There are some people in the region. They have children with severe special needs. If you're able to forge a relationship with them, you could help us tremendously. It was a few years back. I I was attending a luncheon in New York City. It was being hosted for people who were victims of terror. At this lunch, I had an opportunity to meet a person who would serve as my best friend. His name was Shaked. He was a pilot in the Israeli Defense Forces. He said to me, Richard, I have always believed the military should be more open. I've always believed the military should allow for people with disabilities to have a chance to serve. And because of my work, people can never know who I am. And under no circumstances can anyone ever see my face. But they can see you. And if you're willing to work with me, I believe we could make a difference for countless numbers of people. So I'm asking you to come to Israel, to compete in the Israelman competition. The IDF will sponsor it. We'll line up all the people from Special Forces. We'll showcase the possibility that people with disabilities can have. So as we did our swim, as we did our bike, as we did our run, soldiers would gather, articles were written, and a movement is started. The IDF began developing a program to help ensure that anybody who wants to serve in the military can have an opportunity to do so, no matter their disability, whether it's physical or cognitive. If they wish to serve, a place to be created for them. The Curia was incredibly excited, but they said it's going to be up to you and Shaked to travel the country. You're going to have to meet with the commanders, and you're going to have to go base to base. And find people that will invest in this program. As we traveled from base to base, we found that people were getting so excited. They were engaged. What was found by this program was that those bases that chose to participate and allow for physically or cognitively challenged people to serve had the highest morale within the IDF system. What was found was that the soldiers would rally. There was a person with Down syndrome, with cerebral palsy, or autism on their base. Stories would come back about mothers going to base commanders saying, why is it that everyone else gets to come home for Shabbos except for my child? I haven't seen my child in weeks. The base commander would say, the reason that your child has a companion for Shabbos is because the soldiers on the base insist that they go to their homes for Shabbos. People love your son, and they're proud to serve with him. And he has served as an inspiring force for the entire base. So even though you are sad because you haven't seen him for Shabbos, just know the rest of the base is grateful for his presence. This program, as it took flight, as the military got more excited about it, started to get noticed by other militaries all throughout the world. We would do stories for the IDF, their version of Stars and Stripes. We would do television, we would do radio, we would do newspapers. What was happening was that other militaries were reaching out and saying, how can we develop a program like this? People would say, generals, my child has autism. My child has Down syndrome. I never knew this was possible. This program had become so successful that the Knesset began looking at how we can create opportunities for people with disabilities throughout the Israeli government, not just military. So ultimately, a new era was born. Israeli companies were told that they should start focusing on hiring folks with disabilities and special needs. Their response was, we'll do it, but we want government to do it first. So, government stepped up and immediately went to work. And started finding people, positions in all different segments of the Israeli government. Everywhere from public transportation to massage. Was able to help cultivate relationships, and find opportunities for people with disabilities. That then translated into private enterprise, realizing the potential of people with special needs and people with disabilities. A short time after this, Israel said, Richard, we'd like you to represent us at the United Nations. We'd like you to speak about the programs that we're offering here in Israel. If you're able and willing to do this, we believe that countries of the world will listen. You're American, you're a judge, you're going to serve neutrality. And when you speak, you can share what's happening in Israel as an example. But because it's coming from an American who's blind, it will be heard. It will be listened to. It will be appreciated. And it will be respected. So after having the opportunity to address the nations and speak about power, speak about power, and speak about the idea, speak about struggle, challenge, how struggle allows for commonality, how struggle brings people closer together, how struggle allows for people to understand their mission, to understand their purpose, and to understand their place in the world. Everybody has to experience struggle. Everybody has to experience hardship. Everyone has to experience difficulty. Everyone knows a person that they love who has a disability. Whether it's a mother, whether it's a father, whether it's a sister, whether it's a brother, whether it's a friend. Everyone has a relationship, has an understanding, and has a connection to disability. That notion, that understanding, that appreciation of struggle is a commonality. So we ask ourselves a spiritual question. Why is it that bad things happen to otherwise such good people? And why is it that there are some who come to know a greater struggle, or a greater hardship, or a greater challenge, or a greater pain than others can possibly imagine or even attempt to comprehend? Why does Hashem create people like us? Why does He allow for such hardship? Why does He allow for such difficulty? And why does He allow for such struggle to have to envelop certain people? I think there's a powerful answer that has now ultimately been after presenting at the United Nations, invitations started coming in. People would reach out to Israel and would say, would it be possible for this blind judge to come and work with us? Would it be possible for him to come and meet my children? What's remarkable about the world today? Whatever country you go to, people in power, whether they be kings, whether they be generals, whether they be elected, one common theme. Large numbers of them all have children with severe disabilities. Whether they be cognitive, whether they be physical. Many world leaders share this common circumstance, that their children have severe disabilities. But most cultures, those circumstances, those situations, those children will live in the shadows. Many situations they're not spoken of. will never be known. Your destiny is to live quiet lives without any notice. The concerns are varied. The concerns affect transition. It can create instability. It can create ascension as a disability. It can look at weakness. It is something that's best not to be discussed, not to be discussed, and not to be mentioned. But in the day, their children, no matter how powerful a person is, inner child. Nothing is more important than your child. Nothing is more important than your child's welfare, than your child's happiness, and your child's development. The last couple of years, I've been asked to travel to countries all across the world, develop these relationships, spend time with these families, get to become close with them, spend time with the children, learn who they are, have them learn about me, and see potential, never thought of, never explored, never even imagined. This has been going on for quite some time. These are the kind of things that are quiet. Not a lot of fanfare, not a lot of discussion. When people ask, what is the definition of service? Service is doing something where most people won't ever know it was done. A very small group of people will ever really know what you're involved with and what you're ultimately doing. Service is the idea that you do it because you know that something good will come of it. You know that you have the opportunity to make something better. You know you have the chance to allow the world to be a better place. I've had the opportunity to work in countries all across the world. Everywhere from Asia to South America to Africa, and of course to the Middle East. And what's remarkable about it is that Israel has always been a land of the nations. Israel has always been that country that has done incredible work for people with disabilities and for people with special needs. Through her light and through her guidance, relationships have been established. Friendships have been made. But change has also been a part of it. If you're willing to spend some time in the Middle East, we believe this could make a real difference. We believe this could really help a lot of people. All of this work really comes down to this type of conversation. After being in the UAE for some time, having the opportunity to work with all the press throughout the Middle East, who is based out of the UAE, having the blessings of different countries' leadership, doing stories, showcasing possibilities, showcasing a positive American, showcasing a Jew who has energy and excitement and spirit and vibrance, even with the challenges and difficulties of disability. That theme overrode everything. That notion of struggle, doesn't matter who you are or where you're from, that notion of struggle binds people together because of a common power, because of a common experience that allows for people to become friends. And ultimately, when you Look at the road to peace. Look at the road. Once people like each other, once people meet each other, once people become friends with each other, it is a power that can never be stopped. Because once you know someone, and you like someone, and they like you can't turn back. The power of friendship will overcome everything. When we ask, what role does disability play in the peace process? What role does struggle play in bringing people closer together? It comes down to this. There's a meeting with one of the kings. And the king said to me, Judge, I never realized the potential that my child has. I never realized the impact that he could make. I never realized the power that exists in his spirit and in his soul. Now that I understand this, now that I see this, how can we make change? How can we make things better? How can we do this? That's the beauty of the Abraham Accords. Because ultimately, that's where Israel enters. People in power say, how can I make a better life for my child? Doing so, how can I make a better life for those who live in my country in the shadows? What is it that we can do? How is it that we can work together? Israel brings technical knowledge and the work that's been doing for disabilities for years. And how do you design a school? How do you bring a school for special needs populations? This hasn't been something that's been really done before. The idea that you can now start to develop a school. And a school is more than bricks and mortar. It's the programming that comes with it. It's the special ed services that come with it. It's the education instructional models that come with it. That's the beauty of the relationships. That's the beauty of Abraham Accord. That's the beauty of the peace movement. It's the idea of people coming together for a common goal. It's the idea that a king steps up and says, we are going to make our country better. We are going to help our people. We are going to bring people from the shadows into the light. We are going to make this happen. And we are going to have a partnership with Israel who is going to help us in building the schools, who's going to help us in designing the curriculum for the schools, who's going to help us to develop job placement programs, so that children with special needs can come out of their homes and have the chance to go to work in companies like has been done in Israel. And we are going to develop these programs together to show employers all throughout the Arab world the incredible and immense potential that comes when you give a disabled person a chance. When you say, I'm going to hire this person with special needs. And we are to develop together a model that can allow for this to happen throughout the entire region. We are going to do this as a team. We are going to develop these incredible opportunities so that people can get education that they haven't had before, so they can have the opportunity to have jobs that they haven't had before, so that we can develop accessible technology that can be used by people all across the region. We are going to develop these partnerships. We are going to develop athletic programs so that children who have never really been seen or heard will come out and have the chance to be a part of something great, have the chance to run and participate in these programs, that they can be seen, they can be a part of a team, they can have these experiences. We're going to look at public transport. So that people won't be trapped in their homes, but they'll be able to travel freely. The idea of disability, the idea of peace, is this notion that we're making life better for people. People who have been forgotten, In many situations, people who didn't have a lot of hope now see things differently. They see unbridled enthusiasm. They see a sense of optimism and idealism that they've never known could exist before. They see a new day and a new world. There's always been paths to peace. But this one is so personal, is so sensitive, and so important to people because it goes to their core. It goes to their spirit. Because it involves their children. When something involves a person's child, a relative, or a friend, or a person they love, and they can see a better life on the horizon, nothing will stop that. Nothing can stop that. I arrived in Israel. Everyone knew there was going to be a war with Hamas. This was understood. This was known. That Hamas was using COVID as an opportunity to stockpile its weapons. So it was just a matter of time that a war was going to ultimately break out. Going through a war was a very intense experience, especially for a blind person. After the first day of the war, the U.S. consulate, all personnel were evacuated. But it was very important that I was going to stay through this. The reason was that I, in many situations, become the face of hope for people with disabilities throughout the region. This relationships that have been built were so significant that we couldn't take the risk of breaking them, couldn't allow for Hamas to have a victory. So it's critical. Once you become the face of a new movement, disability movement, it's going to stretch throughout the region. It's going to bring this sense of hope, a sense of optimism, a sense of joy. You simply have to go through certain things, and you simply have to understand what the struggle is, and you simply have to accept this is going to be how it's going to be. If you choose to get involved with something, if you choose to push something in a certain direction, if you choose to take ownership of that, you can't turn back. There's too much invested, and there's too much on the line. It was 12 days. There were over 5,000 missiles that were fired in the state of Israel. Challenge for a blind person is, as many of you know, because you're obviously familiar with the circumstances and situations, especially being Israeli, you can only be 90 seconds from the shelter. Now, being blind, that presents a blind challenge because you can't move as fast as everybody else, and you're not able to be as agile as everybody else. So a 90-second limitation makes things a little bit more challenging. The other thing that had to make the war more difficult was for a blind person, everything is more intense. Sounds are more intense. The vibrations are more intense. The overall feeling is more intense. I remember the nights we in the shelter. The IDF was amazing. It always explained, here's what's going to happen. You're going to hear this sound. You're going to feel this vibration. You're going to feel it, and it's going to go right through you. There'll be a lull for 20, 30 minutes. Then you're going to have it happen to you again. And there's going to be a lull, and then it's going to happen again. Then there'll be a lull that might go for a little bit longer, but then it's going to happen again. I was always grateful for those explanations because as a newcomer to this, it was quite helpful to know what it wasn't really a mystery when someone's explaining to me, okay, get ready because you're going to go through this, get ready because you're going to experience that. And what was intense about it was that you hear the missiles as they were approaching, you hear the missiles as they were above, and you hear the sounds of the, like being in a movie, you hear the sound of them falling, you hear the boom, boom, you hear those sounds as they were, falling. Then you hear the launch of the Iron Dome. You would hear the sound of the interceptor. As the interceptor would get launched, you hear the launch of the interceptor. Then, as the interceptor would collide with the incoming missiles, boom! 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 The entire building would vibrate violently. This would just repeat itself over again for a 12-day period. But for a blind person, sound is just so much more intense. Feeling is so much more illustrated. And the vibration just goes right through. And it's hard to experience it because when you're blind, the other senses are so much more magnified that the vibrations are just like a very, very intensive experience. But it's all worth it. Because the war ended. Day after. They said, you have to be on television. I was on TV. This was broadcast all over the region. It was myself. It was one of the top Israeli officials. And it was one of the most prominent sheikhs in the region. And when this sheikh spoke, represented a lot of people, had tremendous influence, a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful person, had great power in his words. It mattered to people. It set the course for people. It dictated policy for people. He came on television, and he explained to the region, we're under tremendous pressure. To pull out of relations. But we're not doing it. The future is too bright. There's too much for us to look forward to. Things are going to get better. He went on to say, we have to get people out of the darkness and into the light. What he meant by that was people with disabilities were going to have an opportunity to have a better life. People that he cared about and knew were going to have a better life. People throughout the region were going to have a better life. We can't turn back. There's too much to look forward to. There's too much optimism. There's too much idealism. There's too much energy. Most importantly, people who lived in darkness are going to have lives never once thought possible. We can't turn back. There's too much to look forward to. There's too much excitement. There's too much energy. There's too much enthusiasm. People like each other too much. We can't move anywhere but flow. For the students that are here and that are watching us, as you study and you learn and you go through your days here at this outstanding institution, there's really one lesson that comes out of all of it. It's not as much about policy as you think. It's not as much about the academics. It's not as much about the intellectualism. It's not as much about as you think. At the end, it's not about how smart you are. really matters. That really matters. It comes down to people. It comes down to having a love. It comes down to wanting to embrace. It comes down to wanting to be with. It comes down to wanting to help people. Really, it comes down to personal relationships. If you care about someone, they care about you. They're going to find a way to make it work. Because at the end of the day, it will always come down to people. There'll be bargaining, there'll be conversations, there'll be discussions, there'll be back and forth. The essence is people. Caring about them, having them care about you. Having commonality. So why is it that bad things happen to LAYS such good people? Why is it that there are so many people who come to know a greater struggle, or greater hardship, or greater challenge, or greater pain than others can possibly ever imagine? It was deep into the night as the angel came upon Jacob, and there existed an immense struggle. And this struggle lasted until the dawn. When the sun rose, the angel blessed Jacob, gave him a new name, the name of Israel, which, as we all know, means one who struggles with our Creator. So as we know from the Scripture, Jacob was not left uninjured. He was given a shattered hip. He would walk with a limp and no great pain for the remainder of his days. I believe the Scripture ties us this for this reason. It was only through Jacob's pain. It was only through his hardship. It was only through his ability to understand struggle that he was given Hashem's greatest gift. The ability to connect. The ability to understand. The ability to relate. The ability to empathize with those who he loves. And only through those qualities that he could become the father of a nation. Why is it that Hashem creates people with so much struggle? It's not to make their lives difficult. It's not to make their lives hard. They serve deeper purpose. What I have seen through my experiences throughout the world, they serve to unify people. They serve to bring people closer together. They serve to create a better world. They serve to help create peace. So thank you for the opportunity to give kind of a formal presentation. Now what I'd like to do is really open this up to conversation and allow for you to ask any and all questions that you would like to ask about everything. So anything's on the table, everything you guys want to know, logistics, technical, whatever you want to talk about as it pertains to the workings of the agreements, the relationships that we foster, the potential that I think exists within the region. Anything and everything is on the table. Please feel free to ask. So who's got our first question? Thank you. Now, who's got like I said, I'm going to let our professor help moderate. Like, grab these pieces. Like, it's always very dramatic when you're asking questions and then we have no idea if people have their hands up. It's very anticlimactic. So, please, whatever questions people have, and I'll repeat it so people are home to hear it. Who's got a question? got a question? Anybody? Yes, please. It's a professor, so this one could be rough.
Well, I'm Harry.
Hello.
So, the way you presented how this program started is like someone came to you with an offer.
Yes.
Let's do something together.
Yes.
I teach, as I explained to you previously, entrepreneurship and innovation. And somehow I can't buy it. It's too much on your character to initiate by yourself. So tell us what happened at that lunch in the beginning. Who was really the one who raised this idea of, okay, let's make a change in Middle East. You could do it in Wisconsin, but Middle East is quite far away. So somehow I can't explain this.
Yes.
Story.
So here's the thing. That's an excellent question. So what ultimately occurred was we never thought, I think the lesson that comes out of it, we never thought that it would lead to this. Nobody, we never thought. Our goal was basically, this was my very close friend who's in the military, who's a pilot, and we just wanted to basically allow for people with disabilities or special needs to have a chance to play a greater role in the military. That was all we wanted to do. We didn't think they would ever develop into this. We just thought that this was a really cool thing. And, we thought that maybe if we could create a few units for special needs populations, maybe we could create some opportunities for special needs populations. The whole idea was that what was happening in Israel was that people that didn't serve in the military basically didn't really have a good quality of life. Because if you go to the military and they excuse you from your service, you don't really get to do much within that culture, within that society. So the whole goal was just to really help to change some protocols and policies within the military. That was all we wanted to do. That was really our entire focus, was just the idea of how do we make this better, right? How do we just create opportunities for parents that have children with special needs to allow their children to be in units. And my friend Shiken kind of been doing this for a little bit, and he would kind of take on this responsibility so that if a commander had an issue, for example, let's say they hired or they brought someone onto the base with a disability, they'd come on as a volunteer, and if there was a problem, he would kind of help to kind of mediate it, make it work, that kind of stuff. But what happened was that it just took off, and that the press got a hold of it, and it just became this really exciting thing. And of course, there were some other programs that had already been kind of going in this direction as well. So it was kind of cool. There were some intelligence programs that had been developed. There were a number of different things that had kind of been working, and it all just kind of conglomerated because there were some other programs that had kind of gotten started, kind of on this path. But what happened was, because of the athletic component, because of the fact that we were doing marathons, we were doing triathlons, it attracted a lot of attention, and that people just kind of got really interested, and especially reporters got really interested. And then once it kind of started, if you were to look at some of the Israeli press coverage that was developed around this, it was running on all the front pages of the different newspapers. Idiot Notes, they would just do these huge stories constantly about it because it just got people really excited. Whether it was a more liberal paper or more conservative, they just kind of got into this. They just got excited about it. And they just created and galvanized this energy and this enthusiasm that just wasn't really kind of anticipated and thought of. And I think once that happened, again, this was never the intention, I never thought this was going to happen, no one ever looked at it in that context, but once that happened, once it kind of started to take on a life of its own, then you had a conglomeration of all these other organizations that kind of started working together and kind of getting excited about it. And then, yes, then once it went to the United Nations, that was it. Once it went to the UN and, this was brought to the United Nations, then from that point, once you address the United Nations and you've got the global coverage from a UN presentation, then all the countries then actually started to reach out and start saying, how can we get involved and what can we do? So I would say that it was basically the level of coverage in Israel, coupled then with the United Nations, sent this into a different orbit. that then ultimately did get a lot of attention and a lot of focus. I mean, at the end of the day, you know, when you really look at it, you know, in my situation, how else is the royal family going to know who the hell I am, right? Like, how are they going to find some random guy in Lansing, Michigan, right? They knew you because of all the things that had been done through the UN and all the things that had been done publicly and globally. So they kind of knew that, okay, if we're looking for somebody with a disability that we can reach out to that can help us, here's the guy that we got to call. And then that's where Israel comes in, because Israel helps to build those relationships and build those connections. And candidly, I think what was really interesting about this is that when you did a peace movement, there was never any connection with disability. Peace movements were usually primarily economic, as you all know. I mean, it's usually done as an economic thing. It's usually done in militaristic kind of thing. So it's either done through economics, or through military, or through those types of things. But the issue with disability was very unique. And it wasn't seen or understood or appreciated as a personal connection that people have with disability because of the fact that it reaches into so many homes and so many people in so many ways that it just hits certain people in a very personal way that they wanted to get involved. So I think your question is an excellent question. And, you know, I think it's just an example that you just never know where something is going to lead. Did I think when I went to Israel to run a triathlon that it would lead to speaking at the United Nations? Never. I was going to Israel to run a triathlon. Did I think of going to one military base and going to lead them? No. But it just did. And it was one of those situations where it kind of took a life of its own. And as a result, it just kind of transformed basically in a lot of ways how people saw it. But I think there were certain triggers that really did it. I think number one, it was, so when they put you on the cover of that, and that cover then is read by militaries all across the world, then yeah, I think it kind of does help to create that kind of opportunity. So I think what ultimately happened was, yeah, it started off as something very small, but then I think there were some people that kind of decided that this was something that should be looked at and invested into. And I think in terms of the level of coverage that was put behind it throughout Israel and then throughout the region and then to the United Nations, I think kind of took it to the level that it kind of went to. And I think that hopefully it will kind of continue to go kind of on that path. And then one other thing that I would say that I think is actually really interesting is that, you know, what's interesting to me is that when I got to the UAE, they wanted this well covered. So if you look it up, it's kind of interesting that this was the front page of all newspapers throughout the UAE. This was on all the UAE television stations, and this was on like every media outlet you could imagine was writing these stories about, you know, disability and potential of disability and the essence of disability. So all of these different media outlets all throughout the region were covering it. And I asked my kind of counterpoints, I said, you know, so what's going on here? Like, why is it that all these media outlets are basically coming to the UAE and asking for interviews? You know, why is it I'm spending a day with a media outlet from this Arab country, a media outlet from that Arab country, a media outlet from another country, and they're all coming to the UAE in order to do these presentations, or to do these profile pieces? Like, why, you know, why is it happening? And it was explained to me that, look, this is an opportunity that some of these countries see to change the narrative and to start moving in a different direction. But they can't just do it on a dime. You can't just all of a sudden say, okay, you know, we've decided that we want to start working, you know, with these folks after there's been a narrative that's been discussed for quite some time. So the idea of the media that is being done through a number of these different countries was to allow for people to have a newer understanding of someone who's Jewish and someone who has some struggle or has some hardship. And this is what they wanted. And it's interesting because in a lot of these countries, nothing goes out unless the government says that it's going to go out. But it was green-lighted by a number of these different GCC countries that were very supportive of it and doing large pieces about it, and basically just trying to introduce folks to people in a way they hadn't been introduced. I hope that answers your question. Your question is an excellent question, and I don't really have an answer to that either. I can only say what happened. And basically, they said, hey, you want to come and do a triathlon, and you want to come and see if you can help change how the military functions as it pertains to allowing for people with special needs to participate. I said yes. And whoever thought that many years later, this has been going on for a number of years, that many years later you'd be invited to speak at the application. And it's just one of those situations where you just never know where things are going to be or where things are going to take you. You just kind of do the best you can. You do it for the right reasons, and things can sometimes just develop from there. But it wasn't certainly our intent, and it wasn't certainly what we envisioned. We just thought we'd create some opportunities for some people with cerebral palsy or some Down syndrome or some blind people to maybe have a chance to serve in different units in a logistical capacity. We just didn't think that it would develop into what it turned into. Other questions? Other questions? Yes. And I'm happy to review that. Yeah. And I'm happy to review that. Yeah.
Oh, here, thanks. Thank you very much indeed. It was an inspirational talk. I can't say that I've been very inspired by too many talks that I've heard, but you're certainly was among them. I have a two-part question. The first part, when you mentioned the kinds of individuals in the Israeli society who have been found opportunities to serve in some capacity in the military. You mentioned individuals who are cognitively or physically impaired in some fashion.
Yes.
But you didn't say anything about veterans. Sadly, there are a lot of Israelis who've been wounded in service. After they have been rehabilitated, are there any opportunities for them to be reintegrated with their units in some new capacity that would allow them to continue to serve, provided, of course, that's something that they want to do?
That's a wonderful question. So that's not what we've been working with, but I think it's an important issue. There's separate entities that are kind of working on that. Our focus was allowing the people that had disabilities who had not served have a chance to serve. So I'm not really versed as to kind of those types of programs, but I know that it's something that is important, but I can't answer your question. I'm sorry, because it's just a separate issue, which is basically our focus has been how do you get someone who has a disability that hasn't served get a chance to serve, and that's kind of been the focus that we
that was the first part of my question. Let me just a quick comment on that. Partly what led me to think along those lines was years ago I had some opportunities to talk with veterans. Had an interest in returning in some capacity to serve. The question came as a great surprise to all of them. But to my surprise, they all said yes, they would look forward to it, were they capable. My other question is something on a bit of a sour note.
I don't know if time we will.
I'm very encouraged to hear about all of the interest that the press showed in these developments in the Middle East. That's certainly a very promising.
Especially the Arab one. That was
yes, indeed. I read the New York Times every day, cover to cover. I cannot recall reading a single story in that newspaper of record that talked about this. If I missed those stories, I think I know why I missed it here, because the Times increasingly is becoming is diminishing any sort of good stories about Israel where it possibly can. but that's something else. You have any, have you had a chance to meet with American reporters to talk about your accomplishments?
Well, I want to say, first, it's a wonderful question. First off, none of this is my accomplishment. I appreciate what you're saying, but, and going back to the professor's comment, there's a lot of people that are really working hard on these issues and that, are pushing kind of forward on these issues. The uniqueness that kind of developed as effective American, that was kind of the uniqueness that kind of developed, and a judge. That just kind of developed into the uniqueness of the circumstance and the situation. But I would say is that, and again, I believe what you're saying in the formal presentation is that, dreams get replaced by wisdom, meaning that, this is no means a panacea or a magic bullet. I mean, this isn't going to bring peace to the region. What I would say is it allows people to feel a connection with each other. What I would say is that there was a real interest. What I would say is that people care about it. But yes, is this going to ultimately, is working with disabilities going to change the region, or is it going to bring a lasting peace? Absolutely not. The professor is absolutely correct. It's not going to be any of those things. But I think what it is going to help to do is it does create a warmth and a camaraderie and an energy and a spirit that was interesting. And at the end of the day, when this all comes down to this, there's always going to be different pathways that people are going to take. There's always going to be pathways, right? This is just one pathway, right? There's going to be a litany of different paths that people are going to go on as it pertains to how this is just, at the end of the day, what it really comes down to, this is just a small pathway that had been developed in a positive way where people felt a real connection that will hopefully help to create some special relationships. I mean, is it going to do much more than that? Who knows? Probably not. But at the end of the day, I just think what you really look at is you look at kind of pulling all the levers, right? There's a number of levers, there's a number of things that have to be done and can be done. This was just a nice, positive thing that factors into the conversation. Is it going to shape the conversation? Probably not. Is it going to impact the conversation? Probably not. Is it going to change everything? Certainly not. But is it just a nice, feel-good, positive thing where people can come together and feel better and start to talk? Is it something that can create a positive relationship or a friendship in there? Absolutely. Can that overcome other things? We'll see.
Yeah.
But that's my point. This is just one thing with many other things and many other challenges, many other difficulties that are going to develop. But it's a good thing, and it's a positive thing, and it's a nice thing that will just be kind of put together with a lot of other good things or bad things. But it was something that hadn't been thought of or really seen as potential, that now people see it as potential where it has been.
Well, I think it's a very important first step, and let me just add one thing, if I may. As you know, MSU, if you're the offices of the Jewish Studies program, is embarking on a program to fight anti-Semitism on campus, and for that, they have made connections to a number of offices throughout the campus. But the one that I don't think has been established yet is the handicap office. And here is a natural sort of way to show that part of the fight against anti-Semitism is to bring to the campus, and to that office in particular, some of the good works that you and your colleagues have been doing in Israel. So maybe an opportunity to broaden the approach that has been taken.
I think that's excellent. And I think what people don't realize is just how advanced Israel is when it comes to disabilities. That it's an incredible, they've done incredible work on this, and Israel is really made this its focus. Like, it's something that Israel's proud of, and it's something that's marketing to the world. And I think it is something that's very unique and exciting. A small country can do this and showcase potential for specialist populations. It's an example for what other countries can do. Other questions? Other questions? Other questions? These are great questions, though, I gotta tell you. And I love the questions. The more challenging the question, the more I like it.
Justice Bernstein, I'd again like to thank you for this fabulous talk today. It's very inspiring to all of us. And it's amazing that you have found something that the Arabs and the Jews have in common, and that is disabled children. And that you have found this niche that they can both agree on, and they both are sensitive to, and that they can work together on. And you say, well, this really isn't going to have that much of a long-term meaning. I disagree. I think this is going to be, it can be a very, very important block in building peace. And along with that, I'd like to, I'm a little confused with the link between the Abraham Accords and the disability issue. That how, number one, how do they come together? How do they, what is the symbiosis between the two? And also, as the Abraham Accords grow, and they have been growing for the past year, it's pretty been wonderful. How do you see the Palestinian issue being involved in that? You said you wanted a challenging question, so I throw it out.
I want to emphasize, I'm not an expert in this. I just was asked to go and help facilitate relationships and help to spend time with folks and connect with folks. I want to be kind of respectful to the work that I do. It's not, my goal is just to kind of help to bring people together and establish relationships and build friendships and basically allow for people to meet each other, spend time with each other. And it's really just my goal to connect countries and people with Israeli organizations that can help to foster and create and the construction of these programs and services. So it's like really, the goal is to kind of build like you have a need where a number of these countries want to do something. You have an expertise which Israel is able to provide, and really my goal is to try to allow for those folks to kind of get brought together and then figure out the best people to work with the people that want to do things and who has that kind of ability to kind of service it in the most positive or powerful way, and just kind of be in these situations kind of like a conduit so that you understand the needs of what people are looking for, and then you provide the technical support from the entities that can ultimately go to work and make that happen. That's really kind of what my focus is and what I do. But in answering your question as it pertains to this is that what I can say in terms of what I observed was that ultimately I spent some time in the territory as well, and not of course in Gaza, but in West Bank. And what I would say to you is that ultimately it's just the same thing exists wherever you go. It's the same thing, which is it's parents, which doesn't matter who you're meeting with, doesn't matter where they're from, none of that matters. It's parents that are like, oh my God, this person is blind and he's in the world. And my child isn't in the world. And how can I get my child to be in the world? How do I make this happen? How do I do this? And then they basically start to look at things from a little bit of a different way or a different capacity, and they get excited about it. And then they say, okay, how do I facilitate this? How do I make this happen? How do I build on this? And that's really kind of, I think what happened. Now, answering your question about the Palestinian, and again, I don't have the expertise in this. I can tell you that I spent time with a number of folks kind of in the territories, and in the territories, I think what you tend to find is the same challenge. And that is, in many circumstances, these children have a lot of their homes. They don't go out, they don't do things in public. They don't experience things in the same way, that we experience it. And I'm always very careful whenever I'm doing presentations, whenever I'm doing events, whenever I'm meeting with people, whenever I'm doing an interview, whatever it is, I'm actually very cautious. My role is very, very specific. I don't discuss politics. I don't discuss, like, what I think this party should do and what I think that party should do. I don't do any of that. Because the minute I do that, it all falls apart. My job is to stay clear of all of that and really just focus exclusively on the children and focus exclusively on building the school and focus exclusively on job placement programs and focus exclusively on the transit and focus exclusively on the athletic programs. My job is very simple, but yet complicated, because my job is really designed to just focus on one issue. That's all I do. Nothing else. Just to speak on that issue. When we do television in the Middle East, when you're doing TV interviews for Saudi Arabia, you are not going to discuss policy ever. That's not what I do. I'm not trained for that. I don't have any expertise in that. That's not at all what I do. I just share my story. But my name happens to be Bernstein. So people know his name is Bernstein. It's very difficult for a person to be named Bernstein and not be Jewish. No, I don't go on and wear a yarmulke to fill in and I don't do any of that. I'm just a guy named Bernstein. So people know, and I don't emphasize Judaism to any of that. I'm just named Bernstein. I'm a Jewish Supreme Court justice who is happening to be talking about these issues and happening to be resonating and connecting with large numbers of people who are in the same scenario and in the same situation. And the miracle of all of this is that the other governments are allowing this to happen. That's the miracle. The miracle isn't anything other than the fact that governments throughout the region are allowing these broadcasts to air. That they're allowing these film crews to go out and do these stories. That they're allowing these newspapers to run front-page stories about this that go on for 3 and 4 pages that talk about this blind person and the potential that is learned and that is seen and understood. That's what I do. I basically go, share my story, stay away from the politics, but let the subtle reminders of my name, Bernstein, that I'm talking about it. This is the other extraordinary thing. Within the Arab world, within a lot of these newspapers, and a lot of these television stations, and a lot of these radio news, they are allowing you to highlight what Israel is doing. In Saudi Arabia, they're allowing you to talk about programs and services that have been developed in the state of Israel for disabled people. Now, we aren't getting into the Palestinian issue. We're not getting into any of that. But what we're talking about is, wow, in the state of Israel, there are programs for disabled people. There are job placement services for disabled people. There is technology for disabled people. They are allowing you to talk in public about Israel. And they are allowing you as an American to use Israel in their media. In their media. Not in the Israeli media, not in the US media, but in the Arab media. All across the Arab media. They are allowing you to share the beauty of Israel, the values of Israel, the work that Israel is doing. They are allowing you to share in your story as an American the beauty of Israel and what Israel is doing for this population. We're not getting into anything else. We're not talking about anything else. We're not talking about any old issue, none of that. It's just for people with disabilities. That's it. But we're talking about what it means for a kid with cerebral palsy, what it means for a kid with autism, what it means for someone with Down syndrome. And they are allowing them in their publications to showcase Israel as an example for what can be done and for what can happen. And that had never been done before. That had never been allowed before. What, the idea of a Saudi Arabian television station, the idea of Al Arabiya coming and doing a huge profile piece? Are you serious? That's never been done before. They've never done that before. For Al Arabiya to do that? And to have that go into Saudi Arabia? That's never been done before. To have them come and do a profile piece and talk about a blind person and their potential and have that get released and unfiltered to all these other countries? It's never been done before. What you're seeing is that this is resonating with certain people in a certain way. And the only way that I can keep doing this and the only way that I can make this work is to stay in my lane. If I come out of my lane, it doesn't work. So I'm always very careful about all of that. I'll tell you another quick story. I was in China, and it was the same thing. Basically, I've been to China, but I was invited to go and do some speaking events in China. And when you go to China, you have rules. And the rules are very strict. And the government is going to monitor it. And again, this is a very intense conversation that we could have in any of your classes if you ever want to do it. Because it's a challenging thing, right? You're going to a country that's got a lot of civil rights issues, it's got a lot of problems, all that stuff, right? So the question is, yes, if you're going to go and speak in China, and you're going to do what I do, are you going to be able to speak about civil rights? Are you going to be able to speak about the other issues that are facing the people in China? Absolutely not! Absolutely not! So you have to make a decision. Are you going to go and follow their rules? Are you going to go and follow and potentially make a difference for a certain group of people or not? It's that simple. You either follow their rules or you get kicked out. And State Department, they're going to explain this all to you. You either do what they tell you or you leave. It's really simple. It's very simple. If you go in and you say the wrong thing, you're gone. It's pretty easy to understand how this works. But the question you have to ask is, do you do it? Right? Do you do it? And the answer that I came to is yes. Because for a certain group of people, you can potentially make things a lot better. And you can potentially make some change and do something. Maybe it's minimal, maybe it's not. But you can attempt to do something that might really make a difference for people in a very profound and very significant way. Not for a billion people, no. But for people with disabilities, yes. So when I went to China, that was a pretty intense experience because what happened in China was they needed to see that you could follow the rules. So they set up some events, and you would go to these events, and you would give speeches at these events. Now the events were only 20 minutes. It would never like over 20 minutes because what would happen is if it went over 20 minutes, it's easy to stop something if it's 20 minutes. You get 2 questions, and that's it. After 20 minutes, it's easy to kind of bring it to a halt if you want to do that. So the issue is, when I went, I kept focused. I understood what the parameters were, what I could do, what I couldn't. I didn't want to upset the minders, and it was just very straightforward. Then what happened was, after they saw that you could follow their rules, I don't want, we can't get into whether we agree with the rules or not. I just followed the rules. You certainly don't have to mention Tibet. You mention Tibet, you're gone. It's that simple. You'll be on a plane that night if you mention Tibet. You're just gone. You mention certain things, they'll take you right from the event to the airport. I was told that. And they won't necessarily put you on a plane that's going to Detroit. They'll put you on a plane that's going to the nearest U.S. port of entry. So you could wind up, Honolulu, which wouldn't be that bad. But they were very clear that that's where you go if you blow it. So the thing is, the fascinating thing about it was, is that over time, it loosened things up. And the newspapers, which were, of course, government, started writing these amazing stories that were going all through China about this American and that, you know, this is something that we can learn from America. This is something that we can take with us from the United States. And I would talk to folks from state and say, so what's going on here? And they would say, here's what's happening. We don't know this for sure. We can't really know this for sure, so we're only going to hypothesize. There are some people that are using your message as a vehicle because of their kids. And they have some personal connections or some personal relationships that they're very concerned about. They can't be public about it, so they're allowing you to be public about it in the hopes that maybe things will get better. And they're using you as a conduit to start talking about things they can't talk about, that they don't feel comfortable talking about. And literally that's what's happening. I remember going to an event, and there was a huge number of people at this, and it was going well past 20 minutes, and it had gone for 3 hours. And I said to the organizers, I said, this is getting really long, I think it's time to wrap it up. And they said, the minders are giving you the green light. They're letting you keep going. So you're going to keep going as long as you can until you collapse, because they're giving you the ability to do this. And we don't get that too often. And they're letting it, and then on top of that, they let it go. Everything I said, word for word, for like 4 hours, they put on the Chinese internet, like 4 hours, without any editing. It was just there, on the Chinese internet. And that's a very unique situation. So it doesn't matter if it's the Arab world, it doesn't matter if it's China, it doesn't matter anywhere. Yeah, I mean, again, do I think this is going to change everything? Who knows? Probably not. But I will tell you this. In China, now again, when COVID broke out in China, we had to kind of suspend a lot of things that we were doing. But I will tell you this, in China, what you tend to see is it was a pretty tough place for people with disabilities, especially in the countryside. If you had a child with disability, it was not uncommon for people to find feces, for people to find fetuses in trash cans. And it wasn't uncommon to find just people with children with disabilities on the side of the road. And it wasn't uncommon, the lucky ones would wind up in institutions. That wasn't, it's a tough life for a lot of people. It's a tough place. That was, but the idea was, my attitude behind this was, okay, I might get criticized for going, I might get criticized for having to work with the government to do this. But before COVID, there was an interest, and perhaps maybe something could happen next. Are we going to solve the world's problems? Absolutely not. But are we going to make it so that a child with Down syndrome won't be in a trash can, or a child with, cerebral palsy won't be on the side of the road? Well, then maybe it's worth it. It doesn't hurt. I don't see a downside. You might as well try it. Why not? I'll tell you one more quick story. I was in India. India was different because India was more challenging in this regard. You didn't have the rigidity of the government that you had in China. So in India, it was fascinating because you didn't have, it's a free society, but it was a very intense environment, like a very challenging place to be. So it wasn't like in China you had rigid government control, which presented some challenges. In India, there's no government control, but it's much more chaotic. And in India, it was very difficult because whenever I go to these places, you have to learn the religions. You have to learn, and not to be expert religious, you have to learn the religious teachings. You have to learn Hinduism. You have to learn kind of what the baselines of Hinduism is. You have to be able to converse it. You have to understand it. So if you're going to be in a different country and you're going to be working on this, you have to understand kind of the essence of where you are, right? So you have to have a baseline of communicating through the language that they understand, which is under Hinduism, you have to learn there's certain conceptual notions of Hinduism, which is it's this beautiful, beautiful, beautiful religion. So you have to operate within the confines. But one of the confines that you have to operate in is that there's a belief, that's kind of a structured belief, which kind of gives way to the caste system. And within the caste system, what happens is that there's kind of this underlying belief that if you have a disability, that the reason you have a disability is because you did something in a past life to merit your disability. So if you're blind, there's kind of an old school belief that is, okay, you're blind because you did something horrible to someone else to merit your blindness. So if you have a disability like me, it's just this belief that you deserve it, right? You did something to merit, to earn it. So no one should have any empathy or sympathy for you because you obviously have earned this disability through your past conduct in a different life. So that's okay, so that's fine. So you have to work with that. You can't be offended, you can't be hurt, you can't, be overly sensitive. You have to navigate through it. You have to understand that this is your kind of navigation. So what we found in India, I would spend time with this stuff gets so hard after a while. I just hope it makes a difference because you experience so much. And it's a lot for a person to have to experience, to see all this stuff and experience it. But I was sent to work with what they call the untouchables. An untouchable is a child who nobody wants due to their disability. These are the children, if any of you ever saw, there was a movie called Slumdog Millionaire. I don't know if any of you ever kind of saw it. But when I was in Mumbai, that was the area I was working in. They actually filmed the movie in the area of Mumbai that I was in. Now I didn't stay in that area. I was staying in a nice hotel. But in the areas I spent time in Mumbai, there's some very, very challenging areas. There's no sewage, there's no electricity, there's none of that. There's disease, there's all kinds of stuff. So when you spend time with an untouchable, these are children that basically live in trash. When I say they live in trash, they don't live near the trash, they live in the trash. And I mean, I was with the press and we were trying to just simply, this was our first visit, this was again before COVID. So this was just our first visit. And the goal was to kind of do many more visits after the first visit. The goal was the Indian Supreme Court had basically said that blind people couldn't serve as judges. And they passed a law that said, in many situations, that blind people couldn't serve in many other positions within the country, which then breeds a lot of discrimination and prejudice, because if it's coming from the high court, it says that blind people or other people with disabilities can't serve in these roles or can't serve in these positions, then what happens is it makes it very difficult for them to get jobs and other opportunities throughout the country. So our goal was to go there to try to help to kind of showcase potential, to see if we can get the Supreme Court to change their ruling and change their positions. So the goal was to go to the most challenged areas of the country. So you go to Mumbai, and you go to basically where the untouchables live, and you would work with NGOs. And what the NGOs would do is the NGO would try to get to the children before there's some bad stuff. They would try to get to the kids before the people would sell them into prostitution. So the idea was, you have young kids, and the goal was who gets to them first. Does the NGO get to them first, or do the people that want them to go into, white slavery, or whatever you call it, the sex trade, to go into the sex trade? Who gets there first? The goal was to get these kids, try to get them, because the parents had abandoned them, they were just on their own. The goal was to get them to come into these programs where basically they would at least be safe from the slave traders that were coming to basically put them in, to sell them into a horrible life. And you would be working with kids, that's why, you talk about COVID, but the kind of stuff, you'd be working with kids that had, I haven't seen leprosy ever, but these kids had leprosy. These children had tuberculosis. these children had stuff that I thought didn't exist anymore. They all had it. And what you would do is, for the photographs, is you had to embrace them, which is my pleasure. I just look at life and just say, you're going to do what you're going to do because it's the right thing. And you're going to do it because it matters. And you're going to do it because it's going to have an impact. And you're going to do it because it doesn't matter. You're just going to go for it and see what happens. So you know, when you embrace something with leprosy, it shows not just that you're sitting there and you're just going to talk at them, but that when you embrace them, you give them a hug, and it's clear they have leprosy, and that shows up in all of the press throughout the country, that here you are, an American judge, you are embracing a child with leprosy who lives in the trash. That means something, right? Is it going to make a huge shift? Probably not. But it certainly sent a message. And I was invited to actually go to the Indians. Now, of course, COVID kind of stopped a lot of this, so we had to rebuild it all. But yes, I was invited to go and present, and perhaps go and spend some time in the Supreme Court, to make some arguments about why they should change the rules, and why this matters and why this is important. So you just never know where something is going to lead. You just never know what is going to wind up happening. Now, if we didn't have COVID, I would have been in front of the Indian Supreme Court arguing that these are changes that the court should make, that these are things that we can do. I was invited to do it. Now, of course, because of COVID, we have to start from the beginning, but if we didn't have COVID, we could do that. And who knows what would have wound up happening, or what could have ultimately occurred. Who knows where that could have ultimately. I know we're running late. Are there other questions? I mean, I'm happy to stay as long as you want. I just want you all to get bored.
I promised out 4 hours. So thank you so much for the great presentation and for all your work. I'm very inspired, to hear your emphasis on people to people change. And I found your points about how you can sort of try to keep that apolitical in some ways, but then of course working with governments is sort of inherently political in other ways. And so one of the questions I had was, in your work for both Israel and the United States, a lot of your work was outward facing, sort of trying to bring these innovations, for example, from Israel when it came to schools or transportation, to the UAE or to other countries. And I was wondering if through your conversations and relationships with the Israeli officials that you worked with, whether that was able to illuminate or spark thoughts on their side on, ways in which, despite innovation in some sectors, Israel itself could do better with disability rights, and in particular around a lot of the time that you were doing this, the rates of PTSD in Gaza and the West Bank, or the murder of Ayad al-Halak, I'm sure was like a prominent, event at that time. And so I'm wondering whether your perspective and your experience and relationships with those officials sparked any conversations about, where disability justice does intersect with policy, particularly militarized policy, and sort of whether there was that almost reciprocal exchange, I guess, and whether you felt you had an impact. And also for the U.S. example, we have a lot of, I'm sure you know, disability justice issues in the United States, whether when you were acting as an ambassador to China, you felt that your perspective was also heard on the U.S. side. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about that.
That's an outstanding question. At the end of the day, again, it comes back to staying in my lane, right? Like my thing is, I literally don't get into those things because basically it's one of those situations where I'm just really cautious about that. Really, my job, and I just keep it very simple, my job is just to basically go connect with folks, have them connect with you, for them to see potentials in ways that they haven't necessarily seen potential or envisioned potential, and then ultimately just allow that to take you to where it's going to go. I think in my situation, I think sometimes I realize that the way that things have become now in our country and probably throughout the world is everything has just become very brash. Everything has just become very intensive. And there isn't any room for subtlety anymore. It's just so brash. You have to it's like if you don't say the same thing 100 times, or you don't throw a bomb, you have to just constantly, it's so brash. It's just, everything has to be an attack, or everything has to be just so intensive, right? It's just because of the noise, people will do whatever they do to get to the noise. So rather than having a subtle, gentle dialogue and conversation, it's not like that anymore. Now the rashness is so intense that people feel like if I want to make a point, I have to hurl it like a weapon, or a bomb, or a rock, or whatever it is. It's not subtle conversations anymore. It's not just, hey, let's have a really great conversation, or a really great discussion, or a really positive and nice discourse. It has to be, in order to get attention, people have to do things that are just very intense and very outrageous in order for people to get noticed. And so I think it's just because there's so much noise right now that it used to be that people could actually talk to each other, communicate with each other, and do things in a really pleasant, nice way. But I think because of the way things are structured, people are just forced or compelled to have to take everything to an extreme on both sides. And I think what happens with that is there isn't really a discourse. People watch what they want to watch or hear what they want to hear. And so as a result, there isn't this kind of subtlety. Subtlety is so important when you're spending time with people or connecting with people. Subtlety is such a critical element because subtlety just doesn't mean that you allow for people to kind of gently talk to each other or gently communicate with each other, or gently get to know each other. And I think that the answer to your question is that it's too difficult at this point because without nuance and without subtlety, it's very hard to accomplish that message because ultimately everything is met with just a very intensive, kind of overwhelming narrative that's exhausting to hear it. So for me, my attitude towards this entire thing is I just stick to what I do. And basically I don't give people advice, I don't develop policy, I am working on policy or have developed programs and services, but it's not political policy. It's here's how you build a school, or this is the expertise that you would need to develop this program, or if you want a job placement, I'm more technical. I just focus on the technical elements that are necessary to create services and programming for people with disability. But the essence of it is in order to get to that, you have to start with a baseline, which is the technical stuff comes after people feel excited and energetic about doing it, right? The technical stuff comes when people say, this is something I want to do. If people say that this is something that I want to do, the rest of it comes easy. So for countries like China, or countries like in the South Americas, or countries in Africa, or countries in the Middle East, the baseline needs to be that they need to want to do it. They need to see a value in it. And so before you start talking technical, you've got to get them excited. They've got to feel inspired. They've got to feel enthused. I was in Australia doing this, and it was really interesting. A country like Australia, right? They're very modernized, just like the United States. They're a wonderful, amazing place. But even in Australia, you still had to create a certain level of excitement to get, like, you'd have to, when you talk to Parliament, when I was speaking to the Parliament, you had to get them excited, right? You had to kind of get them to see, wow, this is a really exciting thing to do. This is something that we really want to get behind. And you just get people revved up. You get people energized. And then the rest of it just kind of flows. Then the experts can come in and kind of do what they do after that. I'll just conclude with kind of one very fast story. But I was asked to go to Italy. And you're thinking, well, Italy's amazing. What happens in Italy, right? It's wine, it's cheese, it's pasta, it's wonderful people. It's the kindest people you're ever going to meet. It's just an incredible place. So what's going on there? Well, in India, in Italy, there was a party that now COVID changed everything. This was before that, of course, but there was a party that came to power, they were called Five Star. And they were a very nationalistic party that had come to power within it. And they kind of, they were a pretty intense group. They run an anti-immigration policy, and all that, which made them very popular, which made the government very popular. But then they did something that I received a phone call and was asked to come and see if perhaps we could change the narrative. And the Five-Star government basically said, there was an issue with Italian education. And what was happening was that people were very upset with the educational process because there were too many kids in the class and there wasn't enough money for the education. And people were just upset about kind of how the schools were being run and what was happening throughout the country. So the Five-Star government said, they made some pretty aggressive comments towards the schools. They had said that one minister basically had said, with the full support of the party, said Italy would be a far better place if we could rid ourselves of these people. And that is a concerning comment, right? Especially in Europe when you make that comment. The statement was, we would be far better off if we could rid ourselves of these people. And there were many other comments that kind of went with that. So I got a call, and they said, would you let it come? And we need, the opposition to kind of, we're trying to use this as a way to kind of negate what Five Star was saying. And I went, and I remember people go to Italy, and they go to all these beautiful places, like Tano and all these places. I wasn't going to those places. I was going to the heart of Five Star. The heart of Five Star would be kind of like the Italian industrial towns, is what they were saying. I wasn't saying these beautiful Italian villages, these beautiful places. I was going to the heart of this government. Of course, Rome, is the capital, but it's kind of like you're being sent to kind of where their base is. Their base was Italian industry, on the countryside, more kind of the more lower economic, lower socioeconomic parts of the country. So I would go there, and I have to tell you, they organized this over here. I've never seen people organize anything better in my life than how these people organized it. You would go, and you would go to speak at a school. They would have probably 1,000 kids at the school, and the kids were just amazing. You hug the kids, hug you. You have all these photos, all these different things. And what was interesting is, in answering your question, there's a way that I've been taught how to do this, which is you don't take them on directly. You don't take on Five Star. I'm an American. I have no business taking on Five Star. I'm not Italian. I have no business challenging a different government. No business at all. Who the hell am I to tell this government what they should and what they shouldn't do? But what you would do is you would just go and share your story. That's all you would do. Share your story, answer questions on what it's like to be a judge, let the rest of it follow. And what ultimately occurred, was actually really interesting, was, remember their comments. Their comments were, we'd be better off without these people. So here you got a blind guy who's coming in, not responding to those comments, but just basically traveling the country and sharing your story. That's it. And the Italian media did the rest. They picked it up. The provincial media, they went nuts with it. And of course the Italian national media went with it. And one columnist, I always remember what he wrote, because they would read to me each morning, your organizers would read to you the newspapers, and they'd say, okay, here's how, because they would want to give you feedback. They'd want to say, okay, here's how you're being covered. You want to focus on this, stop focusing on that. This, you made a mistake by talking about this, which was seized upon by opposition, so don't do that, focus on this. And they would do training sessions, and you would learn. You would basically learn what you did wrong and what you did right, and try to make those mistakes again. Mistakes are natural, so people are understanding that that's what's going to happen. But eventually you get better at it, and you kind of learn, okay, this is what you focus on, this is what you do, this is what you stay away from. And then all of a sudden, a lot of the columnists would start writing. One columnist, I don't know what they wrote. They said, this experience reminds us of what it means to be Italians. That we're kind, that we're warm, and that we're good-natured, and that we treat people well. And what was fascinating about it was, I wouldn't say a word, but the local press and national press would reach out to the five-star government. Every day that you were speaking, they would ask for comment from five-star. Never comment. Not one time. Because I stayed away, going back to the question, I stayed away from those controversial things. But yet they picked up on it, and they would ask them all these very hard questions. They would never comment. And what was fascinating about it was, we've learned, I just can't wait till COVID's over so we can get to do this stuff again. But what we learned was fascinating. That came out of this, it was fascinating, was that, now again, the five-star government was back to beating up on immigrants and doing all the stuff they were doing, but they left the disabled alone. And not only did they leave them alone, they increased their funding for programs and services for the disabled, because it become a political problem for them, even though it wasn't a direct challenge to them or a direct fight to them. It had become a political problem for them because they looked mean, they looked nasty, they looked vicious, they looked vindictive, and people didn't like it. They just didn't like it. Some people liked it, but the vast majority didn't. And they started to find that the best thing they could do in this situation was, let's not respond to it, but let's just create programs and services that are going to make this issue go away. And that's ultimately what they did. So I think at the end of the day, you know, I'm not a politician, I'm a judge. All I do is I just want life better for people that live in the shadows. That's my thing. And all I can tell you is that maybe one of the things that we all have to learn is there is some room for subtlety. There is some room for genuineness. There is some room for kindness. There is some room for warmth. And there is some room for humility. Because you don't always have to be the one that's yelling and screaming. A lot of times the quiet people who just make their point in a very peaceful, gentle, warm, compassionate way. By doing that, showcase who the opposition is. And the opposition has to decide who they are and how they look. And what I've found is this issue, okay, I don't know anything about the other issue, I just know this. On this issue, we found after that experience that ultimately, instead of going there and fighting with them and saying, oh, you guys are horrid, you guys are the worst, you guys are this, you guys are that, just go in there and gently kind of explaining why investing in special needs populations, why investing in people that have challenge or struggle is meaningful and worth it. You know, why, without negating them or fighting with them, can potentially have a positive impact. So maybe what we can see as we move forward is there's always going to be struggles, there's always going to be challenges, there's always going to be setbacks, there's always going to be rewards, there's always going to be progress, there's always going to be all of these things. But maybe there is some room for just being kind and being warm and being gentle and being good-natured. And maybe by doing that in a subtle, gentle, quiet way, you can help to make things better and easier and give people a sense of hope and optimism that tomorrow can be better than today. And with that, thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for organizing it. Thank you for coming in person. And thank you to those who are watching us on Zoom.